exceptional.
A player who is currently on the Reds roster is being dismissed, and he shouldn't be. Because if he breaks out, then the Reds for sure win at least 75 games this season.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds, and it is Aloha Friday. That's right. It's also Friday the 13th, but I promise you the only thing scary about today's show will be Jeff Carr's takes. I promise. Thanks so much for making Locked On Reds your first listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and we are free and available on all podcasting platforms. I'm your host, Stephen Offenbaker, alongside the aforementioned bad take Jeff Carr, and we have a passion for baseball. We have a passion for the Cincinnati Reds. And we have taken that passion and we have turned it into information for you. On today's podcast, you all had thoughts in regards to my 100% correct take that Nick Senzel will bat second for the Reds in 2023. Jeff and I are going to dig into those thoughts and discuss why the Reds need Nick Senzel to finally have that breakout year we've all wanted him to have all along. Also, did you know that the Cincinnati Reds apparently have a shot at being the 2032 World Series champion? Well, we'll explore that a little bit and tell you why we're talking about 2032 coming up here in a minute on this live Aloha Friday edition of the podcast. Don't forget, be in the comment sections here on YouTube. Give us your comments, give us your questions. We'll take a few of them throughout the show, and then the entire back half of the show will be your comments and questions where we put you in the driver's seat and we talk about basically anything you want to talk about within reason. A couple of you guys have been naughty the last few weeks and I love it, but I'm not putting that stuff up on screen. Love you guys though. All right, Jeff, people have opinions and people have thoughts. I mean, the comment section's been, there's been participation in the comment section for hours already, just based on the title that the Reds need Nick Senzel.
Yeah, you bring up the words Nick Senzel, you bring up the name Nick Senzel, and I think that it evokes quite a bit of emotion in Reds fans because we're talking about a guy who at one point was the promised prospect. He was the guy that when he got up here and when he got going, so would this team. Guess what? He hasn't gotten going. Guess what? The team hasn't either. We've talked a lot about Nick Senzel and why he needs to perform this year for him, why he needs to bounce back and kind of, or really break out, not really bounce back. You can't bounce back if you were never somewhere to begin with. But the Reds also need him to perform because when you're talking about this team, Nick Senzel is exactly the kind of player that the Reds need to bank on working out if everything else is going to fall into place.
Well, listen, if you're looking for another everyday center fielder within this organization right now, I don't know where you're going to go.
Right.
Because there's not a whole lot of, not a whole lot of other guys. And listen, I'm I am not for a second trying to say that Nick Senzel has done anything to earn that spot. He hasn't. It's just by default, he's really the guy, at least at the beginning. I really hope that Matt McClain ends up taking that away from him. But if we're talking about what Nick Senzel has done for us lately, just a painful review. According to Baseball Reference, Jeff, and this is a very painful number, the 2022 baseball season, not stellar at all for Nick Senzel. Wins above replacement of negative 1.3. That's good for an OPS plus of 64. That's well below league average, well below replacement level. Nick has a lot of work to do if he's going to stay in this lineup. Now, what I'm saying is he's going to be there at the beginning, but if he continues to perform like that, he won't be in this lineup for long. They'll move somebody or make a deal for somebody and replace him in center field.
Yes, but let's talk about what happens should it work out, right? We like to talk about the optimistic side a little bit. And when I say work out, I'm not saying become the guy that we thought he was going to be when the Reds drafted him. Looking back on it, like I pulled up Fangraphs to see what his scouting grades were as he was called up to the major leagues going on 4 years ago now in 2019. And back then they had his hit tool as a possible 70, like a potential of getting to 70. And again, that's a scouting grade out of 80, which means that he was going to be he was believed that he would develop into a elite hitter. That hasn't happened yet. And it's not even really a serviceable hitter that he's so far developed into. I think that if he can just be a little bit of what he was supposed to be, then the Reds are going to take that next step this year. Because we talk about the outfield and we talk about what they don't really have coming up soon. And you hope that you can move Matt McClain to the outfield, or you hope that you can move one of these other infield prospects to the outfield and they pan out, or maybe they make a trade for an outfield prospect. But I still think that Nick Krall and I still think that this team are going to give Nick Senzel some time to figure it out. Because what did we talk about whenever the Reds signed Will Myers? They got a guy on a pretty reasonable 1-year deal. The rest of this roster is going to be filled out with guys who are cheap when it comes to money, and guys whose contracts are very palatable. And even though there are those who would say, why on earth did Nick Senzel get a raise? He hasn't warranted that raise just yet. He is still in that area where the Reds are happy with how much money he is making. And if he does pan out, then he becomes that value, because right now he's, like we said, he's a negative value. And I even looked on Fangraphs, his WAR on Fangraphs, which their calculations between them and Baseball Reference are a little bit different. And they were a little bit more generous to Nick Senzel, but only in the fact that his WAR was negative 0.6 instead of negative 1.3. So it still
sign the extension now.
Yeah, he's got a lot of work to do. He definitely does. But if he pans out, it's going to be so huge, because this outfield is in shambles.
Yeah, listen, with Senzel, I mean, his best season by far was actually his rookie season when he first got called up in May. That season, he had an OPS plus of 87. He hit 12 home runs that year, 42 RBIs, stole 14 bases. It was his best season in the majors, and I think the injuries have taken a toll on him. And, interesting. I'm going to jump into the comments here, Jeff, because, Jimmy McFarland brings a pretty hot take question, and I want to see what you do with it. Here, since we're talking about Nick Senzel.
Yeah.
Jimmy McFarland says that Nick Senzel was a waste of a draft pick. Do you agree with that? Was he a waste of a draft pick?
I think based on the time when he was drafted, he wasn't. It's always hard because, and Doug Gray says this a lot, in that drafting in Major League Baseball is next to impossible, because think about some guys who went in later rounds. Like, I think, one of the best examples is Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter wasn't like a number 1 pick, but he's a Hall of Famer. Like, there's a lot of Hall of Famers. I think Albert Pujols was like a compensatory round guy. He wasn't even like a top first rounder. Mike Trout was not a high first round pick. It's very strange how everything works out, and there's so many variables that go into a guy's development. But when you go back to his draft profile, he was a college hitter. He hit very well at Tennessee, played in the SEC, which many scouts say is basically low A, and he played super well there. So he looked like a polished prospect at that point. So you go back and you say, okay, there's a reason why they took him. It's just his development did not happen the way that they expected when they did pick him.
Yeah, I think he was absolutely the right pick at the time. I think the Red Scouts did their due diligence. I think he was the right pick at the right time. I think the Reds bear a little bit of responsibility in how this whole thing has played out. And you and I have talked about this a lot. I won't go down that path other than to say, while ultimately Nick Senzel is the guy that's got to get out there and prove it, the Reds didn't make that very easy for him when they should have, given him a red carpet welcome into Cincinnati. They made him fight for it in ways that still baffle me. But I think he was the right pick at the right time, and I'm not ready to give up on him just yet, Jeff. I think that while he may never be that all-star level guy, I think there still could be an above average Major League Baseball player trapped in there that may find his way out. And to your point on the draft and, Major League Baseball being hard, I think football has ruined everybody's, expectations of the draft. Major League Baseball players aren't major league ready when you draft them. You don't get that. And you never know what you're going to get. For me, the example I always go back to with the Major League Baseball draft, and this was the old way of the draft. Mike Piazza was drafted by the Dodgers, the very last pick of a draft in the final round, because Tommy Lasorda knew. Tommy Lasorda knew Mike Piazza's dad and drafted Mike Piazza as a favor. And the guy goes on to be a Hall of Fame catcher. Yeah. So you just never know. But for me, I mean, listen, I understand why people are frustrated with Nick Senzel. I get it. And I get why every time we just mention his name, everybody loses their mind. But the Reds need him to do something at least early on. Once the great juggling act of 2023 comes along, as prospects come up and guys find new positions and whatever it is that David Bell's going to do, as I talked about yesterday, to get all of these guys in the lineup, whatever that's going to be, until that happens, they need Nick Senzel patrolling center field. They need him to be healthy. They need his defense. They need him to hit just a little bit. And if he can put up an OPS plus of 110, just to be 10% above league average in center field, that's a win for the Reds in 2023.
100%. And I think there's so many people that are ready to move on from Nick Senzel. And the only way that you're moving on from him is that you're literally cutting him, because you're not trading him for anything. So don't throw Senzel out with the bathwater just yet, because the Reds need Nick Senzel to perform. Steve, MLB.com likes to do these things where they predict into the future and they look at some stuff and they predict that the Reds will make the World Series, but not this season. Yeah, I know. Our dreams were dashed. I know that you and I both thought that was going to happen. We will look at when MLB.com says they'll make the World Series and discuss how it could happen coming up next. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market, bar none, because it's covered with 100% real chocolate, but it's got the kind of statistics that would make everybody on the Fangraphs website and the Baseball Reference website just absolutely salivate, because those numbers are fantastic. We're talking about 120 calories, 130 calories per bar. We're looking at just about 4 grams of sugar and up to 17 grams of protein. They taste phenomenal too. You've got wonderful, wonderful flavors that most of them have the name Puff at the end of them, because let's face it, when you cover a marshmallow with chocolate and make it healthy somehow, then oh my gosh, why wouldn't you eat that thing? They've got some phenomenal puffs like the coconut puffs, the churro puff, all this great stuff. You've got to check it out. Plus, they've got some regular bars that are amazing too, like cookies and cream. They've got double chocolate, which you can find in a 4-bar box if you go down to your local Walmart. Walmart has them on the shelf right now. We've always said, hey, go to built.com and place an order. You can now go down to the store and pick some up. Or if you're near a Sam's Club, you can grab a 13-bar mega box of like brownie batter and churro. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. You got to check out Built today, because it's going to fit right in with your New Year's resolution of getting healthier. I know that I've made that New Year's resolution You can see that I'm drinking out of a Chick-fil-A cup, so it's going well. But Built's going to help you figure that out, because you can get some today at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. And you know what? You can thank me later. Coming up next week, we're going to talk some prospects. Going to look at this Reds farm system. There's been a number of different rankings come out, whether you're looking at Baseball America, whether you're talking about MLB Pipeline, even Fangraphs came out with their rankings. Fangraphs rankings here recently have riled up the Reds faithful when it comes to those who know about Reds prospects. Shout out to our buddy Crazy, who was just like, yes, these are I saw him tweet this. He's just like, these are rankings for someone who's never watched the Reds minor leagues, obviously. But yeah, lots of stuff to talk about. And obviously the future of the team is super bright, Steve, because MLB.com has the Reds making the World Series in 2032.
I've been trying to find a way to be excited about this, and that's 9 years from now.
First of all, it's going to happen before that, but yeah.
There's nobody. I mean, I don't even have any idea who's going to be on this team. I love how they do these type of projections, and it's, I mean, by the time you get that far out, it could very well have just been a guy throwing darts at a board. Interesting that in that World Series matchup, they predict that being a battle of Ohio between the Cincinnati Reds and the Cleveland Guardians. That would be kind of fun. I would be all in on that. That'd be a lot of fun. I think I'd have to fly in for that, Jeff, and you and I just have to drive back and forth between. Yeah, exactly. So, it's fun to speculate about it. And for me, the takeaway from it for me is this. Do they know enough to say the Reds are going to be in the World Series? No. Do they have any idea for the most part who's going to be on the team at that time? Not really. But what it tells me is they're looking at the current state of the Reds farm system. They're projecting a certain percentage of those guys to work out and be the guys that we hope they're going to be. And if that happens, the Reds are going to be a talented team within a window of time. I think that's what they're doing. So for me, at least it's just another reinforcement of being excited about some of the young talent that Nick Krall brought in with all of the deals last year, trading away veterans.
I believe that the Reds will be in the World Series before then. And I see that because them picking the Reds 9 years out, at that point, Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Graham Ashcraft, Jonathan India, Tyler Stevenson, Ellie De La Cruz, Noelvi Marte, and Christian Encarnacion Strand, and probably a couple other rookies that I'm forgetting, Alexis Diaz. They're all going to be in their second contracts, or at least at the stage in their career where they're into their second contracts, i.e., not every single one of those guys are going to be on the Reds roster. So they're predicting a Reds team that has people that we don't currently know on the team making the World Series. And that's the hardest part about this, is to look at it and just say, well, it kind of feels like there's a certain point in this exercise that MLB.com has done that you just kind of throw some darts at the board and say, who have we not written about in this article? Because I think that by 2032, okay, this, I don't know that this is really a take, but this is a thought. By 2032, we might have new ownership. So who knows? Maybe the team is completely different.
Don't tease me, Jeffrey. don't tease me with things like that. God, I hope that's true. I really do. And listen, and for all you folks watching us live right now, this segment, Jeff and I decided to just focus in on some random, it's a potpourri, as one would say, of a few Reds related things that have been in the news recently. I think Jeff and I both, with this World Series prediction thing, like, yeah, it's fun that someone's talking about the Reds a little bit. But there's a couple other things that happened, Jeff, and I know you're scrolling through the rundown going, what's he going to talk about now? I didn't write it down because I forgot. But I did want to make mention of the fact that our guy, the crafty lefty himself, Chris Welsh, who is a friend of mine and a friend of the podcast, was named the Ohio sports broadcaster. I forget the exact title, but he was the something Ohio of the year, broadcaster, sports person.
I think
he was the thing.
Something Ohio of the year.
He was the something of the year. At any rate, I just wanted to kind of make mention of it and shout out to Chris, because in this day and age of more and more guys that, move on to the next gig and focus in on, like trying to just be the color guy on TV or whatever. Chris has kind of found himself in a position now that he didn't start out in, where he kind of does it all. He's on the radio, he's on the pregame, he's on the postgame, he's on the TV broadcast. He kind of basically does everything but Jim Day's job, and wandering around the stands and hell, they may ask him to do that this year for all we know. But he's kind of done it all, and he does it all with tremendous professionalism, and he does it all with a lot of knowledge, and he does it all very well. And, I tell you all the time, when I find myself able to sit down with him, he comes to Hawaii in the off season, and we generally try to get together while he's here. And, there's been a couple times we've been like sitting on the beach, sipping coffee, and he's talking to me about baseball. And I'm like, what is this life I'm living? He just has so much baseball smarts and can explain it and have a conversation about it where you don't feel lesser than, or you don't feel lost. And I think that translates into the broadcast that he does as well. When you're listening to him, you don't get lost. You can learn something, you can find a takeaway, and each one of his efforts in the broadcast booth or on the radio, I feel like I pick something up by listening to him. And, I don't think there's another guy out there that deserves to be recognized more than him. I think it was great that they recognized him.
Yeah. We as Reds fans are super blessed with the plethora of voices that we have around our team. Whether you're talking about Chris Welsh, or whether you're talking about John Sadak, you're talking about Tommy Thrall, talking about Jeff Brantley, all those different guys, like they all present so many different points of view, and you've got different delivery styles as well. Like I know whenever Chris is on the broadcast, whether it's radio or television, it's going to be the smartest form of the broadcast. And I really think that anytime you hear him talk about baseball, you will be smarter about the game. And I also think that, I watch the Cavs, I watch the Blue Jackets, I watch as much Ohio sports as I can, and they all have fine announcers, but nobody's as good as what we have for the Reds. So I'm very pleased to see that he won that. Also, shout out to C. Trent getting Sports Writer of the Year for the state of Ohio.
That's right.
As well. That's
my bad. Absolutely. And we'll spend some time talking about him maybe in our next episode, or maybe we'll just have him on. We'll reach out and get him in here and talk about it a little bit. But, I think that Ohio sports in general, and Cincinnati Reds specifically, have been blessed with a lot of talent covering the team in sometimes difficult situations that I think not everybody is aware of what goes on behind the scenes sometimes, and what these guys have to do to get a story. But I think they do a great job of getting the story and bringing it forward. But listen, Jeff, I think we've hit a point where we can move on to my favorite part of these Aloha Live Fridays, which is the questions and the comments. So we're going to jump into the questions and the comment section and basically put you all, the viewers and listeners, in the driver's seat. This is going to be a lot of fun. It's my favorite part. I can't wait to get rolling on this. And we're going to do that in just a second. But first, I want to tell you to remember you can follow the podcast on all platforms, including right here on YouTube. Click subscribe, click the notification bell so you never miss a beat with us. You get all of the updates when we post something, and you get notified when we go live. You can also follow us between shows. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. You can follow Jeff at Jeff Carr. That's Jeff with 3 Fs. And you can follow the show at Locked On Reds. All right, let's do this thing, Jeffrey, because the comment section has been active for hours. When I logged in to the software here to get ready, I was like, wow, look at all this. People were ready and raring to go. So we're gonna dive right in.
Ready to talk about the lineup, and I see some comments about that.
There is, and there's a lot of stuff. I'm gonna hope I say this right. Joseph Gaditza, is that right? Joseph Gaditza. Will the Reds add an established starter for the rotation at some point before we fire up the season? I think it would be wise. A veteran presence would help the young fellas. All of that's correct, Joseph. I think it would be wise. I think it would help the young fellas. The answer is no. The only caveat to that is if a veteran arm becomes available towards the end of spring training by way of a cut by a guy that didn't make a team, I could see the Reds taking a flyer with a incentive laden deal. Because if you remember, Nick Kroll has said they got to get creative for anybody else that they sign. So one way to do that would be, a low base salary with some incentives. And then if that guy comes in and performs well, they'll trade him by the trade deadline. And, everybody wins at that point.
Yeah, I think that there's an element of wait and see from the planning of this roster. When they're talking about spring training, they're really going to give the young arms all the opportunity to win a job. They're going to give Brandon Williamson all the opportunity to win a rotation spot. Levi Stout, and maybe to a little bit of a lesser degree, Andrew Abbott. I still think he starts the year in AAA no matter what. But also, you've still got guys like, are they going to figure out if Luis Cessa is a starter? Are they going to figure out if Connor Overton is a starter? Is Justin Dunn still a starter? Like, there's lots of guys who, you're not excited about because they're more question marks, and you're not really going to get a veteran who isn't a question mark at this point anyway. It's basically going to be, this was the time of the year, or maybe it was a few weeks after this, but this was about the time of the year where the Reds made the trade for Mike Minor. So, okay, so I say that, but right now was the lockout last year, so I don't know why I said that. Right after the lockout, they made the trade for Mike Minor. So they're not going to do that. Nick Kroll's not going to, stretch for a Mike Minor guy. He's going to get a invite to spring training, waiver wire edition, a Brandon Drury-esque starting pitcher, like you said, Steve, probably somewhere toward the middle or back half of spring training.
Hey, and speaking of spring training, the dates have come out. Pitchers and catchers report February 14th. And I got to wonder if all the players' wives are really Valentine's Day. Really? You couldn't wait till the 15th.
Well, all the players' wives are
have a nice dinner. I couldn't have some roses and some presents before baseball.
All of the players are going, oh, thank God.
Thank God. Yeah. Pitchers and catchers report February 14th. Physicals and workouts begin February 15th for pitchers and catchers. So that is exciting news. It's not that far away. I'm looking forward to.
At least you remember that. I have to ask Hannah exactly what day it is, and she always looks at me like I have 4 heads when I say that. So
I have, listen, for a little inside baseball for everybody following, I've spent quite a bit of time at the Carr family abode, and I never come away from there not wondering how it is that Hannah doesn't slap you in the back of the head every time she walks by you, just because you deserve it. But David S. checks in and says he doesn't see David Bell putting Jonathan India at the DH position. We talked about this yesterday with our lineups and where I was 100% correct with mine, Jeff. Listen, David, when we said this, we weren't talking about full-time DH. And you mentioned that you feel like it would look like a demotion and not a good look for India. Could see them DHing Steer. Yeah, absolutely. I can see a rotation of designated hitters throughout the season. The idea is to use the designated hitter position as almost a day of rest. You keep the bats in the lineup, but they don't got to play the field. They can rest their legs a little bit. So there's going to be a rotation through there. Spencer Steer, Jonathan India, Tyler Stevenson, Joey Votto, and more guys, depending on how the whole thing shakes out. So
And that was more so in that scenario because we were talking about the lineup and the 9 best hitters and how you get them on the field. And I'm like, well, if you're going to put both Kevin Newman and Jose Barrero on the field at the same time, that's your middle infield. So Jonathan India's got to go somewhere else. And in that scenario, he plays DH. I don't think he plays DH every day. I think Joey Votto probably gets the most time at DH. And when you break down how much time they're going to give each player, I'd say he probably gets it 35%.
Wow. That's kind of look at you bringing a little bit of a hot take that Joey Votto will get the most starts at designated hitter in 2023.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure who I would argue that with, except that I would like to see Tyler Stevenson get a lot of starts at designated hitter. Maybe him and Joey Votto compete for that role. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
I could see Joey and Tyler combining for like a 65% market share of the Reds DH possession. And then everybody else is another 35%. Yeah. Okay. I did math right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Jim M checks in. Jim M checks in, and I'm put this up there basically because he doesn't like your troll of a title. I'm going to put that there first. But then here's why I'm throwing this up here. We need a more reliable player to replace Nick Senzel. That's what Jim is saying. He also says that we need to quit trying to save face. And I just want to remind everybody, we do not work for the Reds. What they do, we don't have to save face with that. But to his point about a more reliable player, yes, they do. But that player doesn't exist on the Reds roster right now.
I think that reliable player is the other version of Nick Senzel we haven't seen. Like if that happens, if Nick Senzel comes out and he's hitting like 275, 280 in the month of April, I think everybody's going to be like, oh, and getting on base like 33, 34% of the time. I think that that's going to be a good sign that Nick Senzel is going to take that next step.
Absolutely. And let's squeeze a few more in here for the audio listeners before we wrap the audio side. For the YouTube folks, when we do that audio wrap, stay right here. We're going to keep right on going with your questions and comments. But Joseph Gaditza, again, I just wanted Nick Senzel to be good. We'll likely never find out, as he's never on the field. That's true. Injuries have hampered him. I wanted him to be good too. Listen, I was the biggest Nick Senzel homer fan you guys could find. If you were following me over on Reds Alert when Nick Senzel got called up, it was like a holiday. We dropped an emergency podcast. I had Nick Senzel's dad on. We talked with his dad about the whole process of him getting called up. I am a Nick Senzel fan, and I still want to believe that he can figure it out and that he can be good. But we've reached the stage where I'm not going to hold my breath for it. He just needs to go out and shock us.
Something I haven't mentioned either is, and we've talked about it a little bit on other pods, but on this episode, I haven't mentioned it, is that, it's going to be interesting to see when he reports to spring training, because as much as I do want him to break out, and as much as the Reds would benefit from him breaking out, like Joseph said, he's got to be on the field. And last we saw him, he was on a scooter at Duke Energy Convention Center. So hopefully he's going to be ready for opening day. But as of right now, he's in the same camp of Joey as well. We got to wait and see if that's going to happen.
Charlie White checks in, Jeff, and says that the Reds have Senzel out of position. He's a third baseman, not an outfielder. I put that up there to ask you this question, Jeff. Does the fact that the Reds have moved him around so much and turned him into an outfielder and all of those things, is that part of the problem? Has that impacted his offensive performance? Or what say you?
I think so, because the entire time after he was drafted, up until he got to AAA, he never played in the outfield. And then he got to AAA and they're like, oh yeah, we need a center fielder. Let's put him in center field. And then they're like, okay, well, we're going to play service time manipulation, but he needs time in center field. And so they gave him like 12 games and then they called him up. And it's just like, no,
he's a fast learner.
Yeah. It's like, that's not going to happen. Like, I do believe that the way that they messed around with his positioning messed around with his overall development.
That's a fair point. I don't know how I feel about it. I go back and forth because these are major leaguers we're talking about. And in the case of Nick Senzel, we're now 4 seasons.
He would never say that for sure.
Right. He'll never say that. And we're also 4 years into this center field thing. So I think at some point that has to stop being a crutch, and it has to be about him being healthy and about him delivering. And he hasn't done either one of those things. And that is where we're going to wrap up the audio edition, folks. If you're on the YouTube feed, stay right here. We're going to keep right on going. But for our audio listeners, that's going to do it for today's episode. Watch your feeds for a bonus episode to drop a little bit later, which will have the continuation of the Q&A that Jeff and I are going to do right here on YouTube. But for the audio folks, coming up next week, we're going to continue to follow this team and dig through what's going on. We're going to look at some of the prospects. I hear tell that we're going to be joined by a prospect expert, maybe from within the Locked On family. And speaking of that guy, after you've listened to this show, go check out his show. Make your second listen of the day, the Locked On MLB Prospects podcast with Lindsey Crosby. Lindsey will probably be joining us next week to talk prospects within the Reds organization because he is a prospect encyclopedia. He can bring you all of the info on Major League Baseball's stars of tomorrow. The Locked On MLB Prospects podcast, just like Locked On Reds, is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Until we talk to you again in the audio feeds, we will keep you locked on Reds every single day. All right, Jeff, let's dive back into these questions and comments here on the bonus audio edition for the audio feeds and the continuation of our Aloha Live Friday edition of the Locked On Reds podcast. Charlie White also says, gosh, it's Friday the 13th. Again, the only thing scary here today, folks, is Jeff's takes about the win total at 75. It's terrifying.
I did drive around to go pick up some baseball cards, and it started sleeting on me, and I'm like, this wasn't in the weather. And then I'm like, oh yeah, Friday the 13th. It's just going to do what it wants to do, I guess. Oh well.
Seth Lewis checks in with the DH talk. If Steer's at DH, who's going to play third? That's the great thing. There's a few guys that can play third. Newman can play third base. Barrero can play third base. Steer can play third base. Jeff and I can't play third base, and Mike Moustakas is gone. So defense has improved here in Cincinnati for the 2023 baseball season on the hot corner.
They talked a lot last season, and it was something that David Bell liked to really kind of dive in on, is guys with positional flexibility, and they have that in droves. In fact, the guy they got from the Rangers, Nick Solak, he can play third base as well, and I think he's going to primarily focus on the corner outfield, probably mostly left field, but they definitely have some guys that if they do want to give Steer a day off from playing the field and being at DH, then they can move somebody else to third base. And I don't know that they would miss a beat defensively, because Spencer Steer is adequate. He's not a minus at third base, but I don't necessarily know that he's such a plus that if you put somebody else there, you lose a lot defensively.
Jim M drops in a comment about the bullpen. They haven't taken the next step to fix the weak bullpen. This is true. And I think the bullpen now, I think we probably have to view the bullpen through the same lens as the rotation, which is if there's any additions to be made to the bullpen, they'll come mid to late spring training with incentive-laden deals, creative signings after other teams start making their cuts.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you. Like, the more that I think about it, I think I'm kind of with you on the idea that if they were going to sign one, they probably should have signed a veteran bullpen guy rather than a veteran starter. Number one, it's a little bit cheaper. I mean, the Cubs got Brad Boxberger for like $3 million a year, and Brad Boxberger is a solid relief guy and, former Reds prospect. So I think it would be interesting to see who becomes available in spring training, but also this is another scenario where I think that Nick Krall is choosing to wait and see because of all of the guys coming back from injury. And in their mind, they're like, if we can get 2/3 of these guys coming back and pitching well, then we don't have to spend any more money here. We can save that money for something else.
Jim brings up another great point and something we haven't talked about yet, Jeff. So I love throwing these at you, and we didn't prep for them at all. That's why I love the Aloha Friday shows. But he talks about the Forbes report. I think you saw it. I know that I saw it. Major League Baseball set a record for revenue in 2022, $10.8 billion, which is a breakdown, Jim says, of $360 million per team. No excuses other than lying to the fans about not having money, instead putting it in their bank account instead of investing it in the team. $10.8 billion in revenue, Jeff. That's a lot of money. And even when it's shared amongst all of the various franchises, it's still a lot of money before one single pitch is thrown. When these types of stories hit the media, do you think go... I'm trying to formulate what I want to say here. Does it go a long way in making the Castellinis change their narrative of crying poor? You can't have a record-setting year of revenue at $10.8 billion and then, say, help me, I'm poor, when you're asked about investing in the team and trying to put a better product on the field in 2023.
Did the article say that, this was revenue that was all shared equally?
It didn't. That's just Major League Baseball's revenue. When you look at all of the TV deals and, merchandising, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, their intake, their revenue was $10.8 billion, which is a record for Major League Baseball.
That's the biggest problem, is because when you look at the regional networks and how they bring in the revenue for each team, there are multipliers that have way more than the Reds. I know that like the Dodgers is something like 4 times as much, and like the Yankees is like 6 times as much. It's like a ridiculous amount of more money. It's not all shared equally. And that is exactly how the Reds would tell us that. And that's the most annoying part about this. And I was excited the other day because I saw a report that Major League Baseball hired a guy to be their director of regional networks, which is a step that they would take if they are going to put all of the regional broadcasting under their umbrella, which is a step toward ending the blackouts, which is massive. And I really want to see that one day, but also a step toward revenue sharing and a salary cap system. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be an easy process, because obviously this is step one. They still have many, many steps to go, but also you're going to get a just tooth and nail fight from the Players Association, and it's going to probably institute like another lockout and stuff, but it is the change that needs to happen. Because when you look at, and I'm not saying that Steve Cohen is wrong for the money that he was spending. I'm saying Steve Cohen has exposed the inadequacies of Major League Baseball. And I think that Rob Manfred and everybody's like, okay, we can no longer say that the luxury tax system in place is a soft cap, because we got a dude that's openly flaunting it, and we're going to have more owners come into the sport that openly just, all right, sure, I'll pay that luxury tax and I'll have a $800 million payroll, like, whatever, if you're going to let me do that. So I think that they are moving not only in the blackouts, but also to create a salary cap revenue sharing system, because this 10.8 million that Forbes is reporting, the Reds did not get $360 million last year.
No. And a couple things to just piggyback off of what you're saying. Number one, Steve Cohen is probably the most unpopular guy in the room at every single owners meeting, for sure.
They're all talking amongst themselves, and he walks in and they're like, oh,
shh. Yeah, there he is. Yeah, exactly. The next part of that is, listen, Rob Manfred has said that he is looking to move towards a way to get rid of the blackouts. I think the fan furor over it has finally reached a point where he has to pay attention to it. And, hopefully he follows through with that. To your point about a salary cap, I will say this. Can that happen in the sport? It can. But it cannot happen, I don't think, my opinion, it cannot happen without there being a prolonged work stoppage. We're talking about probably the loss of an entire season in order to get that type of an overhaul to the way that the money changes hands in Major League Baseball. So they have a collective bargaining agreement that's good for 5 years. Is that right, Jeff?
I think it's 2026 is when it's up, or something like that.
So three more seasons after this one. So up until that, there's no way that those kind of changes take effect. Maybe the next time around, they'll dig into that, but just brace yourself, because when that becomes a real viable option, we're looking at a work stoppage where we lose a baseball season. And that's sad, but I don't see any other way for them to get it done.
No, yeah. And I love the news update from the blackout extent, but I did think about that too. I'm just like, this seems like a step toward baseball changing its revenue sharing system to more of a cap model. And like you said, it's not going to be soon, but when it does, it'll definitely be a war. But I think I honestly think it's kind of necessary at this point, because you're going to have more Steve Cohen type dudes, not 30, but you'll probably have 3 or 4 more guys come in. And then you're going to have a tier, not just the Mets, but you're going to have a tier of teams that decide that the luxury tax does not matter and will pay whatever it takes. And they will be so far ahead of everyone else that the Rays model might become moot at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it's, when you look at it just right now, the Mets luxury tax, the luxury tax is more than the Reds payroll. And that is a system that is not sustainable. You can't have that big of a disparity in franchises.
And it's not just the Reds. Like, their luxury tax is almost 115 million. Like the Reds payroll was 115 million last year, 115, 118
ballpark.
So,
Yeah.
so it's not just this year's team. It's like the last couple of years.
John checks in, and this is interesting, Jeff. He says the tragedy of Nick Senzel and Jose Barrero is that it makes it hard for him to get hyped about the loaded prospect pipeline. This is an interesting take, and I ask you this, Jeff: does things like this, things like the failure of Nick Senzel to establish himself as a superstar, the failure of Jose Barrero to demonstrate with any consistency at all that he can perform at the major league level, do those setbacks, do those failures give you pause? Do they discourage you with what you see coming up through the minor league system?
I think it would temper my expectations a little bit, but you can go back and forth on hyped prospects who either kind of panned out, like Jay Bruce, like, had all this hype in the world and came up, maybe not necessarily hit what we thought his ceiling was going to be, but he was still very good. And then you have guys like Nick Senzel, you have guys like Billy Hamilton, you have guys like Brandon Larson, going back to that. It always happens. And there's always two ways to look at it. You can look at the guys who don't pan out and say, why should I think anybody else should ever pan out again? But then there's plenty of guys who come up and are the bee's knees and do pan out. I mean, and then you've got the bee's knees. Come on, man. Bee's knees. Jesus. People say that. And there's some guys who kind of come out of nowhere as well. So I think that just as with anything in baseball, it's easy to get attached, especially when we've had such a run of unsuccessful years. It's easy to say, yeah, it's never going to work out and we're going to be terrible for the rest of my life. But I think that there's plenty of things to point at, and the talent that the Reds have coming up is so much better than the talent that they've had for the last decade, that it's not a case of overhyping prospects based on other prospects who don't pan out. It's the fact of these guys are just that talented.
Jim has a great comment in regards to this. He says he agrees with John, especially if the same people that had responsibility to develop Senzel and Barrero are allowed to be anywhere near the top prospects that we traded for. Well, I can tell you that it is a drastically different minor league system now than it was when Nick Senzel was coming up through the system, and that most part it was when Jose Barrero was coming up. The Reds have made wholesale changes. I mean, we all recall, Kyle Bodie coming in, swinging all the way away from the baseball people to just a solid, hardcore, hard right to analytics change, and then a course correction back towards the middle. A lot of people have come and gone along the way. So I would say that, those fears are alleviated a little bit just with the changes that the Reds have made through that process.
Because that was something too. And I think that it's lost on the fact because they didn't do anything to the roster but tear it down. But one of the things that Nick Krall did while he was trading away guys is that he was restructuring the minor league development system. And that's obviously not near as grabby as the fact that he just handed Wade Miley to the Cubs, which, by the way, didn't work out. But it's just as important when you're talking about these talented dudes, in that the guys who are developing the current crop of talented prospects are absolutely different from the guys who developed the guys like Nick Senzel.
No, I think you and I are pretty much in the agreement as to what's going on there. Jim also, brings up the bullpen again, and I don't think that that's a flaw, because I agree that the bullpen has been for years. 3 years now, Jeff? 2 years, 3 years? We've been talking about this bullpen needs somebody, and they haven't done it. Jim questions the strategy of waiting for leftovers and then hoping and praying for success. And, I'm torn with that. Just when we're talking about the bullpen, not the other aspects of the team, but right, just the bullpen, just relief pitchers, because these relief pitchers, you just never know who's going to be good from year to year. And one year they're great. The next year they can't get anybody out. And, sometimes, a guy within one season, you put him on a different team, his scenery changes, and suddenly nobody can hit him. I don't necessarily think it's that big a stretch and that bad of an idea for Nick Krall to go out late into spring training and bring in some guys that just couldn't quite get it done with whatever team they were with, and use those type of players to put some veteran presence and round out the bullpen in 2023.
The thing about bullpens, I mean, they're just so fickle. The guys who are good, the guys who are bad can be the same guys year to year. I mean, and just little things can affect them, because last year on opening day, I could tell you one thing for certain, that the Milwaukee Brewers had the best bullpen in the division. And then they traded Josh Hader midway through the season, and that bullpen got bad. And they didn't really get rid of anybody except for Josh Hader. And they still had Devin Williams. They still had Brad Boxberg at that point. They still had Eric Lauer and all those different dudes. And they just completely flipped. I don't know what happened there. It's just this weird, they all kind of get, it's almost like a bug, right? They all get infected by it. And I think that when you have a guy like Alexis Diaz who can anchor the bullpen, I don't necessarily think you have to go all out and go sign, like I know some folks have approached about, like, why don't they go bring Aroldis Chapman back? Because like, he's going to cost way too much money. You're not going to pay that much money for Aroldis Chapman, because you're getting a shell of Aroldis Chapman, not the guy that we stood and cheered as Thunderstruck played and he ran out of the bullpen to throw 105 miles an hour. He doesn't do that anymore. So there's different things when it comes to a bullpen working out, that I know that this team has way too much hope in guys getting back healthy and Alexis Diaz continuing his development and becoming even better than he was last year. But I understand why they didn't throw everything at it, because there are days when you're sitting there and you're watching, I'm just going to pick a name out of a hat, Jeff Hoffman give up like 5 runs and blow a game. And you're just like, why don't they throw the book at this bullpen and fix it? But there's also those days where Ian Jabot and, dare I say, Hunter Strickland and Alexis Diaz combine for 3 innings of shutout baseball. It just happens.
Larry Keller checks in, and this one, I don't know what to do with this one, Jeff, but he wants to give Nick Senzel one more shot, and he wants him to be the starting second baseman, moving India to the outfield. There's a lot to unpack there. I don't have a problem moving Jonathan India to the outfield. In fact, we've talked about this a couple times. I'm actually all for it, but we're doing that to make room for other guys that are coming. We're not doing that for Nick Senzel. I guess if you did that to start the season, then Spencer Steer doesn't necessarily have to be your utility guy. He doesn't have to be the super utility. Senzel could be the super utility, but then there's still nobody to play center field. I can't see a scenario where Nick Senzel really gets any infield time at all. At least early on.
The only way I see that happening is if your dream comes true and Matt McClain takes over center field, and then they're like, okay, Nick Senzel can be our super utility guy and move around. I do kind of agree with his point about Nick Senzel kind of being on his last shot. Like, if he goes another year with negative WAR and he's batting .215 and he's getting on base 28% of the time, I do think that the Reds really look hardcore at replacing his spot on the roster next season.
Let's blow on through some more of these, Jeff. Another interesting take from Jim. Bob Castellini is helping make the city a football town. If the Bengals win the Super Bowl, fans will save their money for Bengals tickets. Why watch a loser that Bob is okay with? I like getting into these every once in a while, Jeff, just because Bob Castellini is not going to keep me away from the ballpark. And does it benefit Bob when I go down there? Probably a little bit. I don't know. The way that Jeff and I do our ballpark experience. Not a lot of that money goes to Bob, I don't think, but who knows? At the end of the day, Cincinnati's always going to be, always going to be a baseball-ish town. The Bengals will have ebb and flows of success, and they'll take away from some of the popularity. But the town's always going to be kind of a baseball gig in the summer, especially when there's not a whole lot else for people to do. They're going to go down to the ballpark, and you can choose to withhold your dollars from Bob Castellini, and I'm not going to judge you, not one little bit. but I'm not going to do that. He's not going to keep me away from Great American Ballpark, which is one of my favorite places anywhere in the country. So, I'll continue to go and spend a little bit of money. And if that helps Bob have to sell one less head of lettuce, cool. Happy to help.
One of my favorite things to do, and I live near there so I can do it, is walk around Landon Lake. And on Landon Lake, you have all these people that have way more money than I do, and they have TVs on their back porches, or they have sunrooms with TVs that you can see. And during a spring night or a summer night, when I'm walking around the lake listening to the game on my phone, I'll see plenty of them with their TVs on watching Reds baseball. Like, it just happened. People just watch the Reds. And even if they're bad, I don't think they'll go down to the ballpark as much, because we saw that this past season, where I'm pretty sure there are some nights where the Cincinnati Cyclones are out drawing the Reds. That happened this past year, but I don't think it's a situation where you'll ever see the scale tip to the point where people will choose the Bengals over the Reds, simply because they're not really juxtaposed where you have to. And as a consumer, you can be like, well, yeah, the Bengals are away this week and I can go to a Reds game or something like that. And they've made it, especially with different apps and stuff like that, it's so easy to get into the ballpark for cheap now when they're bad. I think they kind of know, like, supply and demand, it all works out. I don't buy the fact that people are Bengals fans over Reds fans. I do agree that, the city gets more excited whenever the Bengals are successful and the Reds aren't, but that's just human nature. I mean, Kansas City is way more of a Chiefs town, but would you ask them in 2015 if they're a Royals or a Chiefs town? Well, they're pretty happy with the Royals in 2015. So it happens with success, and with most casual sports fans, that's how it goes. If you're winning, we're there, period. But when you're hardcore fans like me and Steve, we're just going to be there all the time. That's just what we do.
And there's ways to do things at Great American Ballpark and not drop tons of money on tickets to get in. Way that, Jeff and I, a lot, folks, we'll buy, cheap tickets, and we never sit still. We wander the ballpark. And a lot of that just has to do with getting to talk to all of you guys. I've been blown away by fan interactions at Great American Ballpark from people that are listening to the show. And that's always great. But Jeff and I wander around. We hit the bow tie bar. We do the pregame out at the beer garden before is that what's called, the beer garden? I can't remember.
Yeah, Budweiser Beer Garden or whatever.
Beer garden, something, the $5 beers before the game starts. We start there. We wander.
Budweiser Garden Bar. That's what it is.
That's the one. And we don't really sit still a whole lot during the game. We kind of are moving around all the time. And that's great.
Great American has great standing room only places too. Mm-hmm. I think that's a key thing. Like, you can stand in the middle of center field and watch and have the city backdrop and all that other stuff. And you can stand at the bow tie bar and get a great view. And you can buy a ticket to sit up at the top of the stadium and never walk up to your seats and still have a great experience.
And we've done that.
Austin
checks in and says, in our lineups conversation yesterday, Jeff, he thought we'd have Stevenson third and Votto fourth, and was surprised that neither one of us did. Listen, there was a time when that's how I would have done things. Joey Votto would have been the cleanup guy, and that would just been the way that it was. Those days are over. Tyler Stevenson is the big bopper of this lineup. Tyler Stevenson is the masher. He is the cleanup hitter, and he's going to be there for years to come. And we just have to face the facts that we have an older Joey Votto that we have to treat a little bit differently. And I still think he's going to put up some numbers, but he's not the guy that I'm putting in the fourth spot, in the cleanup spot.
I can kind of see where he's coming from with this point, because, you get X amount of at bats. I forget exactly how many more, but you get X amount more at bats if you bat third all year than if you bat fourth. So maybe the Reds would want to maximize that. But I also think that the Reds have a couple of guys that have the plate discipline and the ability to get on base necessary to be there for Stevenson to drive them in, that I think I still kind of want him fourth to maximize that run driving in potential. I just tried to say like 3 words at one time there. But the driving in potential that Stevenson brings to this lineup.
Greg Landwehr. I'm going to butcher that, Greg. Greg, thanks for putting a comment. He says he loves the start of the season lineup prediction podcast that Jeff and I did yesterday. He'd love to see what we think the final lineup should be, what kind of thoughts we have. Here's the deal. I have thoughts, and Jeff has thoughts, and most of his are wrong, and most of mine are no. No,
No.
there's a lot of wiggle room here. The problem right now, Greg, is there's so many variables that we need to see play out just a little bit. There's guys that we want called up that may not be called up. There's guys that we want to have rebound seasons that we don't know what they're going to do yet. This type of a prediction, the final lineup, what it should be, what that looks like, I think that's more of an all-star break kind of conversation after we see how a few things play out. At least that's my opinion, Jeff. I mean, I don't think there's just too many things to guess at right now to kind of come up with where we're at the end of 2023.
Yeah, I'd agree, because there's 3 guys that I need to see called up before I make a determination on what the best lineup looks like, and that's Ellie De La Cruz, Christian Encarnacion-Strand, and Matt McLean. Because I think that of the guys who have the ability to be called up this season, those are the top 3 guys who could transform this lineup and transform the Reds' defensive positioning in a lot of different ways. So until those guys are up, and I would tentatively have them in my final lineup, but I got to see what they can do at the major league level first.
Seth Lewis checking in. Bro, I'm excited about another Nick Lodolo. You and me both, Seth. You know, I think I'm looking for big things. I think Nick Lodolo will be an all-star this year. I think that he will be the number 1 starter in the rotation. I think he will pitch in the all-star game this year, and I think he will continue to get better. I don't even think he'll achieve his ceiling this season. I think he has years of growth. And he's going to be great, but we'll still get better and better and better. He's an ace, and I'm excited to see what he does this year.
Yeah, I think his next step is going to be so interesting to see, because if he can clean up that back foot breaking ball just a little bit, still leave it on the back foot, but not hit the back foot, and maybe mix in something else that breaks away. Like, you know, you have that breaking ball that breaks in toward right-handed hitters. If you can come up with something that kind of moves away from right-handed hitters, then he's going to become just a phenomenal pitcher, because there were some guys, some different national analysts and some guys who watch baseball of all these other different teams and stuff that are just like, you know, I'm not going to say that he's totally there just yet, but I'm kind of evoking memories of Randy Johnson watching him pitch. And I was just like, oh, baby, if that's what he ends up being, let's go.
Seth also agrees with you, and I'll let you run with this just for a second, because he thinks it's going to be Spencer Steer's year, basically. And this is the same thing you were saying yesterday.
Yeah, he showed the ability for me to have good plate discipline, and I think that a lot of different things can branch out from that. I mean, if you're able to see the ball the way that he did in that little bit of playing time that he had, then when you give him 300, 400, 500 at bats, you're going to see that production, because we didn't see it. Like, people are going to point at his batting average and say, well, you're really excited about 221 and you're really excited about a slugging percentage under 400. That's a tiny sample size. And I think that we are going to see a lot more of it from him. We're going to see a better batting average. I think he can hit around 260, 270. I think he can slug around, you know, definitely over 400, maybe close to 440, maybe 450. So I think he's an 800 OPS guy. Like, I think that he is the kind of dude. And it was interesting to me that Fangraphs listed him as the Reds' number 2 prospect. I kind of think that's wrong, but I find it interesting that they have that much intrigue in Spencer Steer. And I believe that he can definitely be a key piece to this line. He's going to be one of my favorite things to watch whenever we do, you know, when we get into spring training, we start looking at key players to watch this year. He is absolutely going to be very high on my list.
Jim asks a great question, Jeff, and we don't talk about this very much, but I'm willing to go here for a second. Jim asks, is there any chance that we could get a front office person on the show to take questions? The short answer, Jim, is no. I will tell you,
tried in the past.
Jeff has tried. I have tried. We do know, and we're certain that the front office is aware of this program. Sometimes I say things about the SOB, that's son of Bob, Phil Castellini, that probably means we're not going to get front office people on the show. We will continue to reach out. You know, I would love an opportunity to have a sit down with Nick Krall. And we're going to continue to try for that, but I'm not going to hold my breath. There are some other people within the Reds organization that don't necessarily support podcasts and don't support anything unless your name is the Inquirer or the Athletic. Basically, I mean, we'll just call it like it is. As long as those people are still around, we probably won't get those guys on the show. But Jeff and I are both pretty dedicated to trying. So, I know that we're going to continue that, and maybe one of these days we'll get lucky, Jeff.
Yeah, we'll see. I keep trying to ask, keep trying to tell him, hey, we gave Nick Kroll an A+. Like, would you like to come talk to us about that A+? But yeah, we'll see what the future holds there, because not going to stop trying for sure, because we love the Reds. And I think that it would be very beneficial for us to get to talk to him, and hopefully for, you watching and you listening.
Will Klein asks, do you think that Steer could be a dark horse candidate for Rookie of the Year? I'm still, I mean, I don't think I saw the same things that you saw, Jeff, with his limited time in the majors. I mean, we saw it in the minor leagues, but I have gotten real reluctant to let that translate into excitement at the major league level. I kind of need to see it at this point, with some of the things that have happened over the last few years. But I mean, I guess it's possible. I mean, what do you think?
What's the level past dark horse? Like dark mule? Like mule's not quite a horse.
That's
like
not
a dark
how that works. No. You think he's more than a dark horse candidate? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I want to go as far to say as he could be an award winner, but I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be a step toward positivity where it comes to the idea of the Reds trading for an unestablished player and then making him established as a Red. I think he is going to be the gateway, if you would, to us getting so excited about Ellie De La Cruz and us getting so excited about Noel V. Marte and guys like that, that we'll see Spencer Steer and we're like, okay, see it now. Because remember, for years, we heard that the Reds had all these young pitchers that were coming up, guys like Sal Romano and guys like that came up, and they just weren't that good. Cody Reed and Brandon Finnegan and all that stuff. And we were just like, okay, how are we going to get excited about stuff now? But then there's Hunter Green and there's Nick Lodolo and guys like that. They just had more talent. And Spencer Steer has more talent than some of the guys that we've seen come up through this farm system in a long while. So I think that Spencer Steer is going to be good, but I don't know that I'd put him in a conversation for dark horse and a Rookie of the Year. Plus, I'm not really sure who's in that conversation just yet. I haven't looked at that.
All right, let's do this one. Austin asks, who has a better year this year, Green, Lodolo, or Ashcraft? I've already made my pick in Nick Lodolo. I think he is going to be the ace of the staff. I think the other guys will play some catch up, but they will not surpass him in 2023.
I'm curious about that, because Green really showed some intrigue there at the end of last season, controlling his fastball, commanding his fastball, putting it where he wanted. If he comes in and he starts showing a changeup, starts showing that third pitch, and continues his fastball command, it's going to be hard to not say Hunter Green. Graham Ashcraft, I love, but he's so different from the other two guys. He's very pitch efficient, pitch to contact, get out of the inning quickly. So numbers wise, it's going to be a little bit harder, and you're going to have those peripheral arguments where it's like, well, his K per nine's not as good. His walk percentage is going to be fine. He doesn't walk people. But, maybe he gives up some more hits and things like that. He's just good at limiting damage. And, I mean, it's still going to be good, but I don't know that it's going to be as good as the other two guys.
Austin asks, which lefty hitter gets helped the most by the new shift rules?
Joey.
I think a healthy Joey Votto.
Yeah.
And maybe if you want to expound upon that a little bit. I thought it was interesting. I know you probably saw this. Joey put some stuff out there talking about what he tries to do with the ball when he's hitting, and, what he considers to be like the ideal hit, just to basically left of center. I think that if he's trying to do that, and with the new shift rules, he probably sees the most uptick in his counting stats.
The thing that you always remember early Joey Votto doing when he wasn't hitting home runs is that he had a knack for hitting a soft liner that was over the second baseman's head and dropped in front of the right fielder, whether it be in right center field or straight away right field. It was always this like looping liner that was just able to get him a single. It would drop in. If there was somebody in scoring position, they came around to score. That was vintage Joey Votto if he wasn't smacking dingers or if he wasn't getting a walk. And then with the shift and with the extreme deep infielder in the second base hole that was standing right where that line drive would fall, you saw so many good, solid, hard contact that he had just go right into the glove of the guy that was standing right there. It's almost as if, and I know that the shift was meant for lefties as a whole, but it's almost as if when they came up with that shift plan, they're just like, watch Joey Votto. This is what we need to stop with this shift. And now that they can't do that, I'm going to be interested to see how his batting average is affected, because I think it's going to tick up quite a bit.
Hey, my guy, poofy haired fancy boy makes an appearance finally. How we looking? We are always looking great, my friend. Good to see you.
Orange and black.
Thanks for watching the show today. Hey, here's a non-red story, but I kind of like it. Let's talk about it for just a second. Wait, I clicked the wrong one. Sorry. There we go. McCutchen is a Pirate again, Jeff, and it feels like just a really fun homecoming. And it's kind of what I wanted to see for the Reds with Johnny Cueto. And the Pirates are doing it with McCutchen. And I think this is a kind of a feel-good story. I think McCutchen has some baseball left in him, and it'll be fun to see him in a Pirates uniform again.
I don't remember any heated moments that Andrew McCutchen started. Andrew McCutchen is an awesome dude.
Clint Hurdle's gone, and he was the biggest problem in Pittsburgh.
Clint Hurdle and Chris Archer. But I think that, I thought that was an amazing move by them. It's an amazing move for him too, because you can kind of tell McCutchen's getting toward the end of his career, so he can retire a Pirate this way. But I think that this is a nice move because they've made a couple of different nice moves that you're not going to say that they're going to win the division, but they're probably not going to lose 100 games either.
Seth Lewis checks in. This will be fun. Jeff needs to only worry about if Bob Castellini has invested in Frybox. The listeners pay attention when you talk, Jeff.
It happens. Yeah, I'm missing me some Frybox. Need some buffalo chicken Frybox, man. I was scrubbing through my photo reel on my phone because I just got a new phone, and I was like, let's make sure I'm not using up too much memory. Like 4 or 5 pictures of some good fry boxes I had this year.
Nobody has ever accused you of using up too much memory. Randy checks in and says that we need Nick Senzel because there's no one else to play center field. We agree. But he brings up Michael Ciani, and we haven't talked about Ciani in a while, Jeff. Do you think Ciani is a contender to sneak in and steal some playing time? I don't know that he's quite ready for prime time yet.
I don't think on opening day. I think he starts off in AAA, but I think that he's one of the first guys on Nick Krall's speed dial for a call-up. I've seen some interesting stuff. There's some folks who think that Michael Ciani can kind of be a little bit valuable to the Reds, and I deleted it off of our nice little graphics list here to use, but even in Dan Szymborski's early Zips projections, he had Michael Ciani listed as a possible center fielder. So I don't necessarily know that he's going to get it right out of the gate, but he really could push for some playing time in June if Nick Senzel's not taking that step forward like we hope he can.
Will Klein asks if there's any chance we can get some of these prospects on the pods. Well, I will tell you folks that this offseason we've had Tyler Stevenson on. If you go back in the archives to the lefty in the bullpens that I've done, I've talked with Spencer Steer already. I've talked with a couple other guys. I talked with Matt McClain, did some other interviews. Those will continue. Jeff and I will try and get some
Steer
of
right
them
before he got called up too.
Yeah, in fact, that was a scramble. I was talking with his representative, and he's like, "When do you want to do this?" And I'm like, "I want to do it today because he's not going to be around much longer." And I barely got that interview in before he got called up. So we're going to continue to do those kind of things, folks. Jeff and I will try to get some of them in the main audio feed. I really enjoy doing the long form interviews that don't necessarily lend themselves to the actual main feed of the podcast. So I'll pull those off into the lefty in the bullpen segments. The ones that we can make fit into the podcast feeds, we'll have them on. Jeff's got some stuff cooking with major leaguers. I know that we may see a Lucas Sims appearance here pretty quick. Bronson Arroyo will be back before his Hall of Fame induction into the Reds Hall of Fame. There's lots of guests coming. The Reds beat writers, the radio guys, Chris Welch will be cycling through. Sadak will be cycling through. We've got names coming for you folks. We have been tremendously lucky in the relationships that we have forged along the way, both Jeff and I, and we're going to have a lot of guys that know a lot about Reds baseball coming at you all season long.
Exactly. Yeah, we gotta get us a Lucas Sims update here soon. This is about the time of year we usually talk, so gotta get him
Hey, our buddy Scott Campbell says to just send him any of the questions we have for the front office. He'll ask Phil at the caravan stop. I don't know. Listen, if you guys weren't at Reds Fest, and if you happened to be listening on the radio when Phil was being interviewed on the radio and you heard Phil being booed, that was our man, Scott Campbell. Shout out to you, Scott. Way to go. Because Jeff wouldn't let me do it. I tried. He told me no. He made me behave.
I think it was on the Red Leg Radio Report too.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I'm scrolling here, Jeff. Talk.
Yeah, I am looking forward to this spring training, though. I think that there's going to be a lot of dudes that we start to see prove themselves a little bit. Michael Ciani is near the top of the list, who I'm very interested in because, like we said, he's a light hitter who doesn't quite have the bat. He didn't have the hit tool that, Nick Senzel was reported to have and stuff like that throughout the minor leagues. In fact, we've talked to Tom Nichols plenty of times where he's just like, Michael Ciani is one of the most impressive fielders I've ever seen. And I don't think that there's anyone better in the organization defensively than Ciani is, but I don't know that he can hit. And if he can't hit, there's no such thing as a light hitting center fielder anymore. So I wonder if he can develop that. And I think he's going to get the opportunity too. We talked about this lineup and how there is ample opportunity for somebody to step up and take a job in 2023. And he's got to be on the short list of guys who are at least going to get a look.
Let's hit a few more of these before we call it a day, Jeff. And I know this next one is a topic you're very excited about. Tyler says he is excited to see a healthy Jake Fraley hit at Great American Ballpark for a full season, at least against right-handing pitchers with no shift, helping him as well if he was, to be able to bat against lefties, I guess. Fraley has shown some opposite field power. He's been a pretty good player, and you're like super high on Jake Fraley.
Love me some rake. Can't wait to see him. And yeah, like he showed a completely different side of himself because that first month he was struggling so mightily. And then he went down with the injury. He went down to AAA, worked on some stuff, came back, was a completely different hitter. And I think we will continue to see more of that because he's been doing, doing those workouts throughout the offseason, getting ready for the season. I think he's going to come ready to hit, and I think he's going to come ready to prove that he's more than just a fourth outfielder on a possibly good Reds team here in the next couple of years.
Well, I think for sure in 2023, he'll be a starter in the corner, one of the corner outfield spots until somebody can take it away from him. I'm interested to see if the new rules in regards to the shifts and some of the changes they made makes him a little bit more of a viable option outside of a platoon situation. And we're not going to know the answer to that until we see it, until we see how, and the players respond that are batting, until we see how the defensive arrangements respond. If the guys try and skirt the rules or get cutesy with windmills that we talked about for defensive alignments, there are some things that could be done. It'll be interesting to see because I think that if he can hit a little bit against left-handed pitchers too, he could play in a lot of games for the Reds in 2023.
I think so. And I'm very curious to see because he's a guy, and I think that, we need to have a couple of episodes where we split guys up into guys who just need to prove that they need to be on the roster this year and guys who need to prove that they can be on the roster moving forward. I think he's a guy who's on the list that needs to prove he can be on the roster moving forward. He's a shoo-in to start most of the year this year, if not all the year. But when you're talking about when this roster is ready to compete, are they going to be able to rely on Jake Fraley? And I think this is an important year for him to prove that that's the case.
Greg asks, does Matt McLain make his major league debut in the outfield? And I feel like this is probably directed more towards me. No, I don't think he debuts there. I will say that I do expect to see him in 2023. I think he'll debut somewhere on the infield just because it would be the least amount of pressure on him to make his debut. But I will say that we see him in 2023 and he does play outfield in 2023. Now, how much he plays out there, a lot of that depends on what they do with some of the other guys, what they do about possibly moving Jonathan India off of second base to another position some of the time. There's a lot of variables there, but Matt McLain will play in the outfield in 2023 as far as I'm concerned.
I think there's a couple of things, and maybe you disagree with me on this, but I think there's a couple of things that will happen before we see Matt McLain in the outfield. I think we obviously see Nick Senzel. I think we see Michael Ciani in center field, and I think we see Jose Barrero in center field before we see Matt McLain in center field. Because that's where I think we'll see him. I don't think we'll see him in the corners.
I agree with you with everybody except Ciani. I can see scenarios where we don't see him on the major league roster at all unless there's injuries that kind of derail things. I feel like a lot of these other guys are going to very quickly, very clearly leapfrog him in the pecking order here early on in 2023. So I don't necessarily expect to see Ciani. But the other guys, yeah, I agree with everything else you just said, other than Ciani being in the mix on that one.
He's not a plan B, plan C type guy. I think McLain is more of a plan D or plan E when they get to that, if they get to that. Hopefully, one of the reasons that Michael Ciani was on this roster last September is just because it was so depleted after they made so many different trades that they had to, because, well, they need to put 26 guys out on the field and they need to have, 5-6 guys who could play outfield. So he had to be up here.
Well, I've said it a bunch of times. It was either him or you. And
yeah.
I mean, there you go. And on that note, I think that is probably going to do it for this Aloha Friday live edition of the Locked On Reds podcast. For all of you guys that have spent a little bit of time talking Reds baseball with us today, thank you so much. I tell you guys every week, this is my favorite show of the week. I love talking Reds baseball with you guys. I can't wait till the season gets started and we can do it live down at Great American Ballpark. We can continue these conversations on Twitter. Make sure you're following both Jeff and I and the show. I look forward to these. Can't wait to do it again next week, Jeff. 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on Fridays. If you guys have ideas about things you would like to see as far as live shows go once the season starts, start sending those messages to Jeff and I. Start dropping them in the comments. We're cooking up some plans, but would love to hear from you all about how you would like to see this continue once the season starts. What types of interactions you would like to have, what kind of coverage you would like to see from us centered around the Cincinnati Reds. And with that being said, Jeff, go ahead and wrap us up.
Thanks everybody for joining in, for commenting, and for sending your questions along. You can always check us out 3 days a week throughout the off season. We're going to be 5 days a week once pitchers and catchers report back here in a couple of weeks on February 14th. So make sure that you check us out. If you're not following the podcast, follow us on your favorite podcasting platforms and right here on YouTube. If this is your first time watching us, thank you so much. Make sure you're subscribed and you click that bell to get notified whenever we've got new content for you. But that's going to do it for us here today. Now make sure you go check out Locked On MLB Prospects, as you will learn something, whether it's about the Reds farm system or someone else's farm system, from Lindsey Crosby. Locked On MLB Prospects is just like Locked On Reds. It's free and available on all platforms, including right here on YouTube. Steve and I will be Locked On Reds every single day, so make sure you join us.